There is a quiet emptiness that lingers long after childhood ends, a space where words were spoken but never truly heard. The laughter that should have been shared feels distant, the tears that should have been witnessed dissolve into silence. Growing up without being understood leaves invisible marks, subtle yet profound, etched into the way one moves through the world. Every glance, every conversation, carries a shadow of that early loneliness. It is not merely absence, it is the echo of unacknowledged thoughts, feelings, and dreams reverberating into adulthood. And yet, within this echo lies a strange intimacy with oneself, a quiet resilience born not from recognition, but from learning to navigate a world that often overlooks the unspoken. The earliest memories often carry a strange duality. In one moment, the world is vast and full of promise. In the next, it is a place where a child's voice is muted before it even reaches the air. They speak, but the words drift past unheeded, like wind brushing over untouched grass. They cry, and the tears, however loud or insistent, ripple only within their own chest. There is no mirror for their emotions, no gentle reflection that says, "I see you. I hear you." In these moments, the invisible child begins to form, not as a deliberate choice, but as a quiet necessity, a survival mechanism shaped in the shadow of disregard. It is not always the result of harshness or abuse. Sometimes it is the small, nearly imperceptible patterns. A parent too preoccupied to notice a frown, a teacher too busy to ask the right question, a sibling too absorbed in their own world to respond. It is subtle yet pervasive. The child internalizes these silences. They begin to wonder if their feelings are too much, too small, or simply unworthy. Each unanswered question, each overlooked gesture, becomes a stone added to a hidden wall, a boundary between their inner self and the world outside. In this solitude, the invisible child cultivates a particular type of sensitivity. They learn to read expressions before words are spoken, to anticipate moods, to bend themselves into shapes that feel acceptable, hoping that one day someone will notice. But the constant bending comes at a cost. Over time, the child starts to question the validity of their own emotions. Am I overreacting? They ask themselves. Do my feelings even matter? The mind, still tender and forming, learns to adapt to a world that seems inattentive, and a subtle, quiet resignation takes root. Even play and imagination, often the sanctuary of childhood, are tinged with this yearning. Stories are told not just to entertain, but to test whether someone will listen, whether the invisible threads of thought can be acknowledged. Dolls, toys, drawings, they become companions that respond without judgment, witnesses to a voice otherwise unheard. The invisible child's inner world grows lush and detailed, a private realm where feelings are recognized and validated, even if externally they are not. Yet, the weight of invisibility is never entirely absent. Social interactions carry an undercurrent of anxiety, a persistent question: will I be understood, or will my presence dissolve into background noise? Early friendships, formed with hopeful expectation, can bring both comfort and the painful reminder of being overlooked. The invisible child navigates these spaces cautiously, learning that protection often requires shrinking, muting, or performing only the aspects of self deemed acceptable to others. And so, the invisible child is shaped by both absence and resilience. Their emotions are keen, their observations sharp, their inner life rich and uncharted. They learn to survive in a world that fails to meet them where they are, yet they also carry a hidden longing, a fragile, persistent hope that someone someday will see them fully. These earliest experiences do more than leave scars. They plant seeds that will influence the perception of self, the formation of relationships, and the rhythm of emotion for years to come. In recognizing the invisible child, we do not seek to assign blame. We see instead the human condition in miniature. A life quietly waiting to be mirrored, a soul quietly yearning to be understood, and the delicate, enduring ways in which early neglect shapes the very fabric of identity. To understand the invisible child, one must look backward, not at a single moment, but at the subtle, recurring patterns that quietly shape a life. The origins are rarely dramatic. They are woven into the fabric of everyday existence. A household where words are scarce or emotions are dismissed leaves a child suspended between longing and caution. It is not always a matter of neglect in the traditional sense. Sometimes it is the absence of reflection, the habitual overlooking of small signals, the expectation that children simply adapt without explanation. These early dynamics plant the seeds of misunderstanding. Parents, siblings, and caregivers act as the first mirrors for a child's internal world. When the mirror is fragmented, clouded, or absent, the child begins to puzzle over their own reflection. Their joys, fears, and curiosities are often met with distraction, irritation, or gentle dismissal. A parent might say, "You'll understand when you're older," or "Don't be so sensitive," unintentionally signaling that feeling deeply is unacceptable. Over time, the child internalizes these messages, learning to censor, to question, to doubt the very validity of their experience. Family structure, emotional availability, and cultural expectations all intertwine in shaping these origins. Some households are nurturing but overwhelmed, where love is present yet difficult to access consistently. Others are rigid, where conformity is prized over curiosity, where emotional expression is interpreted as weakness or inconvenience. Even environments marked by stability can fail to cultivate understanding, leaving a child to navigate complex emotional terrain alone. In each context, misunderstanding forms quietly, subtly, yet profoundly, leaving traces that echo far beyond the home. Communication itself can be an invisible barrier. Words may be present, but they may lack the warmth, patience, or resonance a child requires to feel truly understood. A question answered hastily, a story interrupted, a feeling minimized. Each instance teaches the child that their inner life is negotiable, secondary, or perhaps even expendable. They begin to scan the emotional landscape constantly, seeking signs of connection that rarely appear. Over time, this hypervigilance becomes second nature, a method of survival born of repeated disappointment. Origins are also found in what is not said, the silences, the omissions, the unacknowledged moods. A parent preoccupied with work, a caregiver consumed by their own struggles, a family unit fractured by tension or unspoken rules. Each creates an invisible child, a young soul learning that attention is conditional, and that feelings may not merit recognition. These origins are not always intentional, yet their consequences are deeply felt. Even as the child grows, the patterns set in these formative years persist. Emotional gaps, unspoken rules, and misaligned expectations follow them into adolescence, shaping identity and perception. Friendships, school interactions, and early romantic experiences are filtered through the lens of prior misunderstanding. They carry an ingrained caution. To speak too openly is risky, to hope for acknowledgement is uncertain. The past, though distant, continues to shape the rhythm of connection and self-expression. Tracing these origins is not an exercise in blame but in awareness. By mapping the roots of misunderstanding, one begins to see the profound interplay between environment and identity, between early neglect and later emotional patterns. It becomes possible to recognize that the invisible child is not merely a product of circumstance, but also a witness, a quiet observer, a tender navigator of spaces where understanding was scarce. In acknowledging where the unseen begins, we gain a glimpse into why it lingers, and how early experiences continue to shape the inner world long after childhood ends. When a child grows up without being understood, the mind begins to adapt in quiet, intricate ways. The brain, especially in early development, is remarkably sensitive to social and emotional cues, or the lack thereof. When consistent recognition and empathy are absent, neural pathways form that favor caution, observation, and self-regulation over spontaneous expression. The child learns, without conscious awareness, to moderate their feelings, to anticipate the reactions of others, and to protect themselves from the subtle pain of dismissal. This adaptation is both ingenious and burdensome, a survival mechanism that carries long into adulthood. Attachment, the invisible thread that binds children to caregivers, is particularly affected. Secure attachment relies on responsiveness and attuned care. The gentle acknowledgement of a cry, the mirrored expression of joy, the calm reassurance of fear. Without these affirmations, the child may develop insecure attachment patterns, avoidant, anxious, or ambivalent, each shaping the way relationships are approached for years to come. They may learn to distrust the emotional availability of others, to doubt the consistency of affection, or to cling desperately to fleeting signs of connection. In essence, the child's brain becomes a careful economist, budgeting emotional investment based on past scarcity. Cognitive processing also shifts under the weight of misunderstanding. Thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are constantly filtered through the lens of doubt and self-monitoring. Do my emotions make sense? Am I overreacting? These questions echo in the mind, shaping thought patterns and self-concept. Over time, the child may internalize criticism or misinterpretation as objective reality. The inner voice, once innocent and exploratory, becomes cautious, precise, even critical, as if rehearsing for a world that does not always validate their experience. Memory plays a subtle role as well. Experiences of neglect or misunderstanding are stored not only as conscious recollections but as embodied responses. Tension in the chest, a quickened heartbeat, the tightness of shoulders when speaking, the hesitation before sharing a thought. The mind encodes these somatic markers as cues, guiding behavior long before conscious awareness intervenes. In effect, the invisible child carries a map of emotional absence within both mind and body, a guide that directs interactions, often unconsciously, through familiar patterns of vigilance and self-protection. Emotion regulation emerges as a central adaptation. Without consistent models of acknowledgement, the child learns to manage feelings alone, suppressing some, amplifying others, or redirecting emotional energy inward. This self-directed regulation can foster resilience, creativity, and introspection, but it can also intensify anxiety, self-doubt, and isolation. The mind becomes both sanctuary and prison, a place where rich inner life coexists with an underlying fear of exposure, misinterpretation, or rejection. Yet the mind's response is not only reactive, it is remarkably reflective. The invisible child begins to observe patterns in others, to anticipate moods and behaviors, and to detect subtle cues that signal understanding or its absence. This hyper-awareness is a double-edged sword. It provides insight and adaptability, yet reinforces the ever-present sense of being unseen. The mind becomes both architect and guardian of the self, carefully balancing desire for connection with the instinct to protect against repeated emotional harm. Scientific research confirms what the invisible child has always sensed intuitively, that emotional neglect leaves a measurable imprint. Neural pathways, attachment systems, and cognitive frameworks are shaped by the rhythms of recognition, or their absence. Understanding this response is not an attempt to pathologize, but to illuminate, to see how the mind, when faced with incomprehension, crafts strategies to survive, to anticipate, and to endure. In tracing these responses, one begins to appreciate both the quiet resilience and the hidden fragility that define a life shaped by being unseen. The invisible child grows into a mind and body acutely aware of absence. The world outside continues, seemingly indifferent, while a quieter storm brews within. Every unacknowledged word, every overlooked tear, leaves traces that settle deep in the psyche. It manifests as a constant questioning: am I enough? Am I worthy of attention, of care, of understanding? These are not fleeting doubts. They are persistent companions, shaping perception and guiding action. The struggle is silent, because to voice it risks further misunderstanding or disappointment. A subtle paradox emerges. The desire for connection is ever present, yet the fear of being overlooked, or misread, creates a protective barrier. Emotions are carefully measured, expressions modulated, and thoughts filtered. Vulnerability becomes an act of courage, not a natural state. Each conversation, each social interaction, carries an invisible cost-benefit calculation. To speak openly is to risk invisibility once again. To remain quiet is to preserve safety but also distance. In this tension, the invisible child navigates life like a tightrope walker over a void. Feelings of inadequacy are often compounded by comparison. Observing peers who seem naturally seen, naturally understood, can intensify the inner ache. Why them and not me becomes a quiet refrain, a question asked not to others but to oneself. These reflections are not self-pity, they are deep, instinctive attempts to understand a world that has repeatedly signaled that one's inner life is secondary, conditional, or expendable. The mind, attuned to patterns of neglect, anticipates further dismissal, creating a cycle of vigilance and self-doubt. Yet within this struggle lies remarkable insight. The invisible child learns to read the subtleties of human behavior, to notice emotion in gestures, tone, and rhythm. They cultivate empathy born of personal absence, a sensitivity that allows them to perceive what others may overlook. Their internal life becomes vivid, layered, and reflective, a realm where feelings are honored, if not publicly recognized. But this richness is often paired with exhaustion, for constant self-monitoring requires energy, and persistent doubt can erode spontaneous joy. The tension between hope and protection defines many internal conflicts. They yearn for affirmation and belonging, yet instinctively guard against disappointment. Relationships are approached cautiously, friendships tempered with reservation, expressions of love and care carefully measured. Every attempt at connection carries a hidden test. Will this time be different, or will the familiar pattern of misunderstanding repeat? This delicate negotiation between longing and self-preservation shapes adult behavior in profound, often invisible ways. Resentment and self-blame can quietly intermingle. The invisible child may wrestle with subtle anger toward those who failed to notice, and simultaneously question their own legitimacy. Was I too sensitive? Too demanding? These internal debates are exhausting yet formative. They teach vigilance, caution, and reflection, even as they nurture a persistent ache for authentic recognition. Silent struggles are not weaknesses. They are a testament to adaptation. The mind, shaped by absence, develops resilience, insight, and extraordinary emotional depth. Yet the cost is ongoing tension, an internal dialogue that hums beneath conscious awareness, shaping identity and relationships. Awareness of these struggles is the first step toward understanding the profound influence of growing up unseen, the quiet, enduring imprint of being misunderstood. Even in a life shaped by misunderstanding, there are moments that pierce the quiet fog. These awakenings arrive unexpectedly, through a conversation, a gesture, or even a fleeting sense of being truly seen. They are subtle, often fragile, but powerful enough to challenge the long-established patterns of invisibility. For the one who has grown accustomed to being overlooked, even a single acknowledgement can resonate deeply, awakening dormant parts of the self that had been carefully tucked away. Awakenings are rarely instantaneous. They are accumulative, the result of experiences that slowly peel away layers of doubt. A teacher who listens with patience, a friend who notices the unspoken, or a partner who recognizes the rhythm of hidden emotions. Each encounter becomes a mirror reflecting fragments of self that were previously invisible. These moments reveal a simple truth. The inner life, long thought unworthy, holds validity, depth, and meaning. Recognition becomes a bridge, however fragile, between past isolation and present awareness. Self-awareness is often intertwined with these external moments of recognition. Reflection begins to uncover patterns of thought and emotion that were once automatic. The individual may notice the ways they hold back, the cautious calculations, the hypervigilance that has become second nature. With awareness comes insight, the understanding that the invisible child within still shapes reactions, relationships, and self-perception. This awakening does not erase pain, but it provides clarity, a lens through which experiences can be seen more accurately, less filtered by old patterns of neglect. Moments of awakening also challenge the ingrained need for validation. When someone genuinely sees and acknowledges feelings, the individual may initially recoil, unsure of whether it is real or fleeting. Trust, long withheld, must be rebuilt slowly, a delicate process that balances hope with caution. Each successful experience of recognition strengthens the capacity to believe in one's own worth, gradually loosening the grip of old patterns of self-doubt. Inward awakenings are equally transformative. They may emerge from quiet reflection, meditation, journaling, or creative expression, spaces where the mind and heart are allowed to witness themselves without judgment. In these private arenas, the invisible child is recognized internally for the first time. Feelings that were once minimized gain language, nuance, and rhythm. Inner dialogue shifts from critique to curiosity, and a gentle compassion begins to emerge. Yet these awakenings are rarely dramatic. They are soft, sometimes almost imperceptible, like the first light at dawn brushing across a darkened landscape. Their power lies in consistency, in the quiet repetition that begins to rewrite long-held assumptions about self-worth, belonging, and the possibility of being understood. Even small gestures, a nod of acknowledgement, a reflective glance, a compassionate response, can ripple outward, reshaping internal landscapes with subtle yet profound effect. Moments of awakening illuminate a path forward. They remind the individual that the patterns of invisibility are not immutable. There is capacity for connection, for recognition, for resonance that does not require constant negotiation or caution. Each awakening, external or internal, strengthens the understanding that being seen is possible, that understanding is possible, and that the invisible child can at last find threads of presence, both in the self and in the world. healing is not linear. It does not arrive in a single gesture or revelation. For those who grew up without being understood, it is a slow unfolding, a patient return to the self, guided by curiosity, compassion, and a growing willingness to witness what was long overlooked. The invisible child, once silenced and unseen, begins to emerge from shadows, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Integration means learning to inhabit both the tender inner world and the broader reality, honoring experiences without letting them define or limit the present. Self-understanding becomes the cornerstone of this process. The individual begins to recognize the patterns shaped by early misunderstanding, not as flaws, but as adaptive strategies developed in response to emotional absence. Awareness itself becomes healing, noticing the habits of hypervigilance, the reflexive self-doubt, the longing for external validation. With this recognition comes the possibility of choice. No longer entirely bound by childhood experiences, the mind and heart can explore new ways of being, ones that allow for both safety and authentic expression. Compassion plays a central role. Healing requires a gentle acknowledgement of past suffering and an understanding that the invisible child acted with remarkable resilience, even in the face of repeated neglect. Anger, sadness, and grief may surface, and they are not obstacles to overcome, but essential markers of the journey. By embracing these emotions without judgment, the individual begins to dismantle the internal barriers that once limited expression and connection. The process is quiet, often solitary, yet profoundly transformative. Integration also involves relational renewal. With a foundation of self-awareness, trust can be rebuilt in interactions with others. Relationships are approached with a new lens, informed by insight rather than old patterns of fear or doubt. Boundaries, once porous or absent, are established with care, and emotional transparency grows steadily. In some cases, this may mean cultivating entirely new connections. In others, it may involve repairing and deepening existing ones. Each relational step reinforces the understanding that being seen, being heard, and being understood are not only possible, but sustainable. Creative and reflective practices often accompany this integration. Writing, art, music, or simply quiet meditation provides the space to explore and honor internal experiences. These acts of expression are themselves acts of acknowledgement, the invisible child finally given a voice, the inner world finally mirrored and validated. The practice of reflection, repetition, and articulation helps solidify learning, transforming awareness into lived reality. Healing is also rooted in acceptance. There is no need to erase the past or suppress memories of misunderstanding. Rather, integration involves holding the past alongside the present, acknowledging the invisible child, and recognizing the growth and resilience that emerged in response to early absence. The layers of self are not discarded, but woven together, creating a more cohesive, compassionate, and empowered identity. Through this ongoing process, the individual discovers a quiet strength. The invisible child, once hidden and cautious, becomes a witness and participant in life, capable of connection, creativity, and self-recognition. Healing does not erase the scars of being unseen, but it allows them to become part of a larger story, one of endurance, awareness, and the capacity to inhabit the world with both presence and poise. There is a certain stillness that arrives after the long journey of being unseen. It is not a loud revelation, nor a sudden transformation. Rather, it is the quiet settling of a mind that has traveled through years of doubt, longing, and reflection. In this stillness, the invisible child, now an adult, sits quietly, feeling the pulse of a life lived in the shadow of misunderstanding, yet marked by endurance, subtle wisdom, and resilience. The echoes of past neglect are still present, but they no longer dictate the rhythm of thought or the boundaries of possibility. Reflection illuminates the contours of a life that was often unseen. Moments of pain, of dismissal, of absence, are recognized for what they were: experiences that shaped sensitivity, intuition, and an acute awareness of the emotional world. The invisible child carried burdens that were never theirs to bear alone, yet in bearing them they cultivated strength, empathy, and a capacity to witness both their own emotions and those of others with profound care. In the stillness, one can see these gifts clearly, woven through the tapestry of experience. This reflection is gentle, not condemning. There is no need to assign blame for the failures of understanding. The focus is on witnessing, acknowledging, and embracing what was lived. Compassion becomes the lens through which the past is viewed, both toward others who could not see and toward oneself who endured with quiet courage. Recognition comes not from external validation, but from the inner acceptance of one's own story. The invisible child, long unheard, finally bears witness to their own truth. There is also a recognition of connection, both found and yet to be found. The capacity to relate, to share, to be understood, is no longer held hostage by childhood patterns. Relationships may still be approached cautiously, but they are informed by self-awareness rather than fear alone. The quiet skill of discernment allows for meaningful connection without the constant anxiety of invisibility. In this way, the invisible child grows into a fully present adult, one who can navigate intimacy, empathy, and understanding with grace. Poetic reflection arises in the simple, often overlooked moments of life. A smile shared and returned. A thought spoken aloud and mirrored by another. The stillness of a quiet morning, when the mind can roam freely, acknowledging pain and gratitude simultaneously. These small experiences carry immense weight for those who once moved through the world feeling unseen. They are reminders that presence, recognition, and understanding are not privileges, but possibilities accessible through awareness, patience, and the courage to witness oneself. Ultimately, the journey of growing up without being understood is not a narrative of deficiency, but of quiet mastery. The invisible child develops a richness of inner life, a capacity for empathy, and a reflective depth that those who were always seen may never fully know. Stillness, reflection, and self-compassion coalesce to form a sanctuary, a space where the past is honored, the present embraced, and the future approached with measured hope and awareness. In the soft hush of reflection, one realizes that being understood is not only the gift of others, but also the reclamation of self. The invisible child has not vanished. They have matured, integrated, and emerged with a delicate, enduring strength. The world, once indifferent, now meets them with the quiet resonance of presence, acknowledgement, and understanding. And in this stillness, the story comes full circle, concluding not with absence, but with the enduring grace of being truly seen.